At 5:10 a.m. on April 22, 2025, 3 American missiles tore through the morning sky, heading straight for a forest that no one was allowed to see. No planes, no warning, no announcement, just speed, silence, and steel. What were the U.S. forces targeting 80 kilometers inside Russia? Why were 15,000 North Korean troops stationed near Kursk armed with long-range artillery capable of striking NATO territory? And how could 3 HIMARS missiles, which cost less than a missile defense radar, wipe out an entire artillery regiment in just 91 seconds? It wasn't meant to happen, but it did. And every second was real. Follow us. Because once you see it in action, you'll understand why HIMARS doesn't just strike a target, it redraws the red line. By mid-April 2025, U.S. intelligence detected a disturbing shift on the Eastern Front. In a move cloaked from global headlines, 15,000 North Korean troops had arrived on Russian soil. But these were not regular infantry. They were elite artillery specialists handpicked by Pyongyang and deployed under a new bilateral defense pact signed in late March. Their destination, the Kursk region, just 130 kilometers from the NATO frontier. Among the arriving forces were at least 3,000 heavy artillery personnel, bringing with them a dozen Cox M1978 self-propelled guns, the crown jewel of North Korean long-range firepower. Each Cox could launch a 100 70 meters shell over 60 kilometers, making them capable of reaching U.S. military outposts in Poland and logistics hubs in eastern Romania. Satellite reconnaissance showed something far more troubling. Instead of reinforcing Russian forces along known Ukrainian front lines, these Coxon batteries were being discreetly moved into dense pine forests just outside the city of Kursk. There, Russian engineers and North Korean gunners were constructing semi-permanent firing positions under thick camouflage netting and radar-absorbing materials. It was an invisible fortress and its barrels were aimed west. But what shocked the Pentagon wasn't just the hardware, it was the targeting data. Communications intercepts revealed Russian command had issued preliminary targeting matrices that included NATO rail hubs, U.S. ammunition depots, and even Patriot missile sites. These developments set off immediate alarms in Washington and Brussels. The U.S. European Command EUCOM classified the Kursk artillery concentration as a Category 1 strategic threat to regional stability and American personnel. For the first time in the war, an adversarial state, not merely a proxy, but a nuclear-armed rogue regime, was deploying heavy weapons within striking distance of U.S. forces in Europe. The message from the Joint Chiefs of Staff was unequivocal. If we wait for the first shell to land, it will already be too late. Within hours, a covert counterstrike plan was approved. The target, 3 Coxon gun batteries and their logistics elements hidden in the Kursk forest. Before we jump into this battleground, let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you find any truth in this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get started. At exactly 5:10 a.m., April 22, 2025, under the veil of early morning mist, 3 U.S. M142 HIMARS units stationed near Rzeszów, Poland, received a final encrypted green light. What followed was not a warning, not a show of force. It was a surgical obliteration, one that would unfold faster than the human mind could comprehend. 3 M30A1 GMLRS rockets, each costing less than $150,000, were launched in rapid succession. Within 4.8 seconds, their booster stages had ignited, sending each missile screaming into the sky at 10,700 kilometers per hour, skimming just below radar detection altitude. Less than a minute later, over 84 kilometers away, the Kursk forest was about to become a war zone. At 51,058, the first M30A1 detonated mid-air 14 meters above the treetop canopy directly above a North Korean ammunition truck. The alternative warhead released 182,000 preformed tungsten fragments, saturating a 100 meters wide radius in a blizzard of hypersonic steel. The truck erupted into a tower of flame, igniting fuel drums and tearing through a Coxon battery beside it. 7 crewmen died instantly. Their positions were marked only by shredded uniforms and twisted metal. 11 seconds later, the second missile struck. It didn't need to hit the cannon. It simply exploded 3 meters to the side. One fragment punctured the optical scope. Another sheared off the fire control module. A third blew the operator's leg apart as he reached for the breech lever. The Coxon was silenced, disabled, disarmed, irrelevant. At 51,128, the final rocket slammed into the western flank of the encampment. This one didn't burst above. It hit directly on the third resupply vehicle. The explosion flipped the cannon backward and tore its barrel apart like tissue. 2 soldiers manning the breech were vaporized. One survivor attempted to crawl away, dragging his shattered leg before disappearing into smoke and flame. Total engagement time, 91 seconds. Total damage, 3 Coxswain M1978s annihilated, 3 trucks destroyed, over 20 enemy personnel neutralized. By the time Russian ground commanders reacted, there was nothing left to save. There was no airstrike alarm, no drone buzz, no shadows overhead, just silence, followed by 3 bursts of invisible death that vaporized a regiment before it ever fired a shot. For the North Koreans in Kursk, this wasn't war, it was execution. Let me see what the future plans of America are after this attack. In the smoldering silence that followed the HIMARS strike, American analysts began to reconstruct the anatomy of the target, a so-called phantom fortress buried deep within the Kursk forest. What they uncovered was a textbook example of overconfidence, poor timing, and fatal design flaws. 3 Kson M1978 batteries had been arranged in a skewed triangular formation spaced roughly 45 meters apart, designed to reduce the chance of simultaneous destruction. Russian engineers and North Korean officers had spent nearly 72 hours preparing the site. Using a mix of thermal masking netting, steel fragment shields, and multi-layer camouflage canopies, they believed they had created the perfect trap, one invisible to reconnaissance satellites and drone optics. They were wrong. U.S. intelligence had intercepted encrypted movement orders issued by Russia's Western Military District just 6 hours prior to the strike. Cross-referenced with thermal imagery and electromagnetic signatures, it became clear that this was no decoy site. It was an operational fire base loaded, manned, and ready to strike westward. But it wasn't just the target's construction that shocked American planners. It was what it lacked. There were no short-range air defense systems positioned around the encampment. Not a single Pantsir S-1, not a Torm M2, not even a Zu-23. The assumption was that depth inside Russian territory provided protection and that Western forces would hesitate to strike so boldly. Worse still, the position had no active radar coverage. The nearest Podlet K1 radar station was 12 kilometers away and hadn't yet synchronized with the fire control systems. This meant that not only were the cannons exposed, they were blind and deaf. By the time the first HIMARS rocket entered Kursk airspace, the Cox crews were busy conducting final loading drills. A surveillance drone the size of a seagull circled just 200 feet overhead, streaming encrypted targeting data in real time. Its radar cross-section was so small that even if Russia had radar online, it would have appeared as background noise. This wasn't a combat-ready artillery base. It was a showroom built to intimidate, not survive. In warfare, perception means nothing without protection. And Kursk was about to prove that even the most carefully camouflaged bunker can't hide from American satellite fusion, AI-driven target acquisition, and a warhead designed to erase, not penetrate. The fortress hadn't fired a single shell. It never would. The Russian-North Korean coalition never saw it coming. Not because it moved too fast, but because it never needed to be seen at all. The M142 HIMARS isn't a symbol of brute military force. It is a manifestation of quiet destruction. Built for mobility, programmed for accuracy, and optimized to disappear before a counter-strike even begins. Deployed from an American forward operating base near Zashu, Poland, the HIMARS launcher was fully mobile, cloaked within a civilian-looking logistics convoy. From a cold standby state, the crew had less than 3 minutes to load, align, and fire. Just enough time to become lethal, and never long enough to become a target. Each launcher carried 6 M30A1 GMLRS rockets, but on April 22, it only needed 3. Each rocket was fitted with a warhead containing 182,000 preformed tungsten fragments engineered to spread upon detonation like a 21st-century steel hurricane. These weren't explosives designed to break walls. They were weapons of surgical saturation intended to shred infantry vehicles and even camouflaged emplacements in one unrelenting burst. Their guidance systems relied on McCode military-grade GPS, resistant to jamming and accurate to within under 3 meters. Targeting data was updated in real time by a U.S. stealth reconnaissance drone orbiting directly above the Kursk forest, transmitting encrypted signals every 2.5 seconds. The trajectory was equally terrifying. Launched at 53 degrees elevation, the rockets followed a high-arch quasi-ballistic flight path, climbing beyond 21,000 meters altitude before diving at hypersonic velocity. This approach minimized interception windows and turned Earth's own gravity into a weaponized accelerant. In under 90 seconds, the three M3A1s traveled 84 kilometers, struck 3 separate targets, and vaporized an entire artillery group. The HIMARS launcher already on the move. Its 290 horsepower diesel engine enabled it to relocate in under 2 minutes, shifting position before Russian counter-battery radars could triangulate its origin. To Russian and North Korean commanders, the strike was supernatural. There were no drones in the sky, no planes overhead, no signs of movement, just 3 precise impacts, then silence. This is why HIMARS isn't feared for the noise it makes. It's feared for the noise it doesn't. By the time the enemy knows they were targeted, the launchers are gone. The sky is empty, and all that remains is scorched steel and silence. At 5:13 a.m., just 2 minutes after the final rocket had struck, Russia's forward command post west of Kursk attempted to raise the artillery battery via encrypted radio. There was no response, no telemetry, no thermal feedback, no GPS pings from crew devices. It wasn't electronic jamming, it wasn't signal degradation, it was absence, the kind of silence that only comes after total annihilation. 3 minutes later, a Russian Orlan-10 surveillance drone launched from Belgorod finally arrived over the impact zone. Its camera